Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters, or Mikaela Peters as they call me in Finland. So I was trying to figure out what kind of video to put out here today, and thank you again for your continued support as I'm trying to grow this channel and make it all about my life in Finland. I recently got a question on this channel, and I'm low-key wondering if this person watches my other channel, and I guess I have not talked so much about the whole autism thing on this channel, but the question was, what are your thoughts on autism? I have it. So the thing is that I keep telling people is that Finland is like an autistic person's paradise. Now it's like what? But what I mean by that is, again, I think it has to do with the fact that it's highly understimulating as an environment. I think one thing that's a little bit tricky about that is, again, and I mentioned this already yesterday, is that if you're growing up in a much more densely populated area, and let's say you're used to coming up with a lot of creative ways to cope with that environment, that's something that all of a sudden you don't really have to start exerting energy into, and that can sort of make things confusing. So what I mean is, I always felt like in Finland, I finally had time to focus on or figure out the relationship aspect of my life, versus in the US, a lot of times I just sort of let it go because I was a lot more focused on survival, or yeah, I'd say survival, but like in so many senses. Not even just like combating like a landscape of way too much stimulus, but also just in terms of, like you have so many demands pulling at you all the time, and you don't really have that in Finland. Another thing I was thinking about is that actually when I first started recording my videos, I really like made myself look at the camera because I was like, oh, the eye contact thing, like I have to do it. But then I'm like, I don't even do this in real life when I'm talking to people. So I think it started to feel very like disingenuous almost. And I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. So I just talk how I want to talk. But anyway, yeah, like what are my thoughts on it? I mean, it's a condition that exists. The thing is, and recently I was talking to one of my male friends, which this was a whole discussion. I have so many male friends in Finland, and I can't exactly figure out why, because in the US I have like none, and then here I have like, well, no, it actually makes a lot of sense. Most of the people I interact with are from a tech university, so statistically speaking, they're going to be male. But anyway, one of my friend's girlfriends was like, most people who have autism are at a level where they're still functioning, and it doesn't really necessarily inhibit or impede their ability to live a normal life and like subsist and take care of themselves. So at that point, is it really a problem? And like, I agree with this question. I agree with this question. I mean, I agree with the, deduction about this question, I suppose. And, there are certain things that can make it more difficult. For instance, like if you're trying to date, like autism, because there are so many social cues that are associated with dating and being able to read between the lines that, like I would say that's a particular area of struggle for people with autism, aside from just other things that require some level of social scripting that cannot be figured out beforehand. So, I started thinking about like at the restaurant with customers, I'm really good because it's very scripted. Yeah, because I had been working in a restaurant in the US for 10 years. Yep, this year was 10 years. And yeah, like customers liked me and I got good tips and stuff, America. But my coworkers did not like me. And I just like didn't know how to interact with them. And it was really hard for me. And at some point, actually rather recently, somebody had told me like, oh, well, you just come off as very pretentious. And I was really kind of upset by this because I'm like, I don't try to. Other compliments I've gotten, and especially with living in Finland because I speak Russian very well, is like, oh, Mikaela is so modest and like, she does this, that, and the other thing, but, like doesn't think so highly of herself about it. So I was, again, really confused about this. And yeah, I guess there's maybe some self-consciousness around how people perceive you. It's like sometimes you just can't figure things out. Or, what's very interesting for me is, and I've talked about this, on my previous channel, is like I had gone for a neuropsych evaluation actually in the US after my time living in Finland, because like living in Finland, like for the full 2 years that I did my master's, because I was less mobile during that time. It was still during COVID, as I'd mentioned previously. And I learned about this diagnosis. Like, I was not looking for one, to be honest with you. I was looking for an ADHD diagnosis because I was trying to treat that. Autism's not super treatable, so it's kind of pointless to get diagnosed with it, in my opinion. Like, when I asked the evaluator, I'm like, so what are you supposed to do to, deal with this condition? And she's like, I mean, you can socialize, and that's about it. So I'm like, okay. But then you also have to have the desire to want to socialize, which, sometimes that's not there for me, I'll be honest. But yeah, because it's hard, right? Like, putting yourself out there and, you know, as my brother says, drinking is the social lubricant. So, like, Finnish people drink a lot. Like, and I kind of wonder, if there is some sort of correlation between, I won't say there's a correlation between living in Finland and having autism, but if it's an environment that is very attractive to autistic people, and then people are drinking a lot to be social, like, that kind of makes me wonder. Anyway, yeah, so I had gotten this evaluation, and one of the issues that I personally have is that I'm actually pretty good at, like, reading people in terms of, like, tone and, like, what people are saying, and, like, I can actually, like, it's funny because I'm like, no, this makes sense. It's like, I understand sarcasm, technically, even though, like, I never know how to respond to it. And this was the whole thing, is that there's sort of a breakdown at the point at which I actually go to respond to something that is, like, the autistic problem manifesting itself. So it's like, yes, you can, like, understand social scripts, but you, like, don't know what to do with them in response. So again, it's kind of like different levels, because not even everybody necessarily has that. And then I'm like, okay, well, how is that possible? And it's like, unfortunately, the reasoning for that was, if you grew up in an environment that was, abusive, then you're gonna, like, be much better at reading social cues because you're constantly scanning your environment for threats. So yeah, it's kind of a sad thing to mention, but, like, that was her analysis for, like, why I had that certain situation. And it's interesting also because, like, I joke all the time about, like, autistic special interests, but, like, I mean, that's literally a thing, is it's like you have, like, a very, like, rigid, narrow set of interests. And the other thing to keep in mind is not every person who has autism is going to manifest the same types of traits. Like, there is some rigidity around, like, I don't know, let's say scheduling. That's the biggest one I've noticed, probably with other friends I've had in the past who I've also perceived at this point to be autistic, because it's not something I really previously thought about prior to, like, the last year or so. Mostly because I think somewhere around age 15, I'm like, there's something wrong with me. And I'm like, maybe I'm autistic. And then I think I started telling my parents or something, and they're like, no, you're not. And then, like, kids believe their parents usually. So I was like, okay. And then I moved on with my life, and it never really came up again until recently, when I was trying to get diagnosed for ADHD because I was interested in medication, which was a whole saga of a lot of gaslighting, which is why I have very strong feelings against the US medical system. I essentially had a psychiatrist, like, not want to prescribe me stimulant medications. I guess he was worried about, like, an addictive component or something. I still wish I would have, like, tried them, and this is something you can't do while you're pregnant, so, like, it doesn't matter at this point. I just dealt with it, and then I got to a point where my brain stopped working about a month ago, which has been a big problem because I have some stuff I still need to get done for the PhD, and that's another reason why I'm, like, a little bit all over the place. Okay, anyway, so, I got this evaluation. I had to wait 9 months to get this evaluation. I was on a list. I went for the evaluation. The evaluation returned severe ADHD. I took it back to the psychiatrist. We wasted a few appointments and obviously some money on discussing the fact that he was still not going to give me the stimulant medication after the fact that I waited a year. And I was like, so why did I go? And, like, it was very frustrating and invalidating, really. And it's like, oh, well, you're so high functioning, so you don't need this, and blah, blah, blah. And it was annoying. So anyway, another thing is, you can find a lot of videos online that are going to talk to you about, like, the overlap between autism and ADHD. And so, like, yes, I mean, it is, I think, fairly common that these co-occur, but the ironic thing to me about them is they almost, like, compete in weird ways. It's like there's a part of, at least myself, so a part of you that will start searching for novelty and stimulation and all this with the ADHD, which I think comes from my brain. So whenever people are like, I'm bored, I'm like, Can't relate, man. Like, literally cannot relate. Like, I have so many things I can think of doing by myself. As I keep saying, I'm still a human, so I still need social interaction. So at times I need to like set aside time for that. But otherwise, it's like I can think of so many things to do, even right now. Like, oh my gosh, I have so many things to do. So, that to me is the ADHD thing. It's like your brain's like constantly like on overdrive, and you just can't stop thinking of things to do, and you're like stimulation seeking, or you're like novelty seeking, but that kind of almost in some weird way will compete with the autism that likes more like predictability, rigidity, and like controlled behaviors. So I think it's complicated, and like every individual is, I liked an analogy that somebody who was actually a teacher in Sweden gave me, and that was that autism is like a ladder, and it just depends how far up the ladder you climb. So like, some people are all the way down the ladder and didn't climb up at all, and some people are a lot higher on the ladder. And I thought that was like, that made sense. It was a good analogy. And yeah, like I said, there are people who are much more severe. There are people who are less severe. It's pretty like well known that women are notoriously good at masking autism. So, I wouldn't say that like most people think I'm autistic, but there have been things in the comment section on my other channel where people are like, I knew that immediately when I started watching your channel. Okay, good for you. I wouldn't say that knowing about autism is like an everyday thing that most people just know about. Like, I've probably only had a couple of friends be like, oh yeah, I already knew that about you. And I was like, okay, thanks. And like, even like I casually mention it to other friends, and then they're like, but then I kind of also wonder like how many of these other friends are also autistic and maybe low-key in denial about it. So, to me it's about whether you find labeling helpful, because this is also a debate. There are a lot of people who are very like, oh, labeling is bad and we shouldn't do that, and it's focusing, too much on putting people in boxes and not enough on like the individual experience. And okay, sure. But to me, it's like, if you think that labeling yourself is helpful, and like then you can go get information about it and learn about it, and that provides some sort of like mental solace, like good for you, and that's cool. I feel like personally that's sort of what I've needed to do. I feel like for me, getting the diagnosis for autism at least was very like liberating, and liberating is like a weird way of putting it, but like it was like a relief, really. I think that was the biggest thing. That was like, because she asked me, she's like, how do you feel? I'm like, I just feel relieved, because like you kind of know something's wrong your entire life and you have no idea. It feels like it's like going to the doctors and finally getting diagnosed. Like, duh, that's what it was. But like, I don't know, you've been having stomach problems and like nothing you're trying works, and then all of a sudden it's like, here's a medication, take it, and it goes away. And I'm not saying that like a diagnosis like makes it go away, because it doesn't. It's just, it helps you kind of like work on it. So instead of being like, why do I do this? It's like, well, this is probably just the autism. Like, to me, I can almost like compartmentalize it and split it off and be like, that's why I'm doing that. And maybe like it kind of helps me in some way like give myself some grace, because there are certain things that would be really hard for me that just seem so normal and like easy and thoughtless for other people, and like that's not the experience I'm having. So it's a thing that people deal with, for better or for worse. There's a lot of like, it's unfortunately rather unknown how autism even occurs, because the only thing I've heard was that it has to do with like oxygen deprivation in the womb. It's really funny. I can't stop sleeping on my back, and I'm like getting paranoid about this right now, for my own child. But then people are like vaccines, and then people, even though that's obviously widely debated, and then like environmental factor, like it's like nobody knows. So it's sort of like, okay, at some point you just accept it. And then it's like, well, higher rates of autism are occurring. Okay, well, is that the environment? Or is it just that now we know about it and we're diagnosing it and now deciding that it's a problem? Like, there have always been people with mental problems. It's just that we didn't really used to take care of them, sadly. They'd get locked in an insane asylum and nobody would really, like, integrate them into society. And then it would be, like, sad and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, in countries, I'd say like the CIS countries, like the post-Soviet space, where mental illness is still rather stigmatized, that does still happen, and it's very sad. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about Finland also, and this is something I've discussed again, previously on my previous channel, which is that, Finland is very pro mental health in a way that I have not seen in the US. And it was really funny because, like, I was casually talking about being on antidepressants, prior to being pregnant. Like, I went off of them because I figured out I was pregnant. And so, I mean, yeah, it's rough. For me, I think I also figured out that, like, if I try to control my triggers, it helps a lot more than even medication, because at a point I do feel like you do build tolerance to medication. So anyway, like, I was in the sauna. At this point, yes, I'm still in the sauna. I mean, I feel fine, so whatever. I don't go as hard as usual. But anyway, there was this American girl who's here briefly, and then this other Finnish girl, and we were talking about medication, and I was like, oh yeah, like, people, like, just go on medication here, like, or I'm like, they talk about it a lot, like, it's so normal, because it's, like, literally dark and depressing for 3 months out of every year. Like, I think that'd make most people have a hard time. And so, that's what people think makes it easier. Like, the classic joke I keep telling is, after living in Finland, and experiencing winter here, like, I will never experience seasonal depression in New Jersey ever again. Like, it's impossible. Like, there's no comparison. Like, it's so different. But yeah, I think in the US, it's like, people will take medication, but they will not be very forthcoming about it. And there's a lot of, like, stigma around it. Like, I recently found out that one of my relatives, who, I mean, this tracks, right? But it's like, one of my relatives has actually been on medication for, like, years and years and years, and I, like, never knew. And, like, the reason this came up is, like, I was not always being very nice during this time period, if I'm going to be honest with you. And I was like, I kind of need you guys to leave me alone, because, I'm off of medication, and it's, like, been a really hard adjustment. Like, this was very early on, I think, and, like, trying to go off of it and emotionally regulate during a very non-emotionally regulatable time. And, then this is when this other relative confided in me that she had actually been on meds for years. And, like, it was shocking, right? Like, this is my own family member, and I had no idea that, like, mental health was an issue. And this is actually something they talk about with, like, trying to make sure you're not going to get really bad postpartum, is sort of like verifying with your family members, like, how they felt after the experience of giving birth and being at home, to make sure you're going to be, like, mentally okay. But, in Finland, I feel like there is really good social support. So, like, if I'm going to be in that sort of, unfortunate mindset, that it's like, I'm going to be able to get help that I need to cope with it. So, yeah. But again, whether it's, like, an issue, it's like, do you view it as an issue, right? The thing that this is maybe a poor example, but relating this back to the alcoholism thing, because I have also previously talked about, this being more prevalent in Finland, in my opinion. It's like, if somebody is prone towards alcoholism, but they're rarely in an environment where they can drink, is the alcoholism really a problem? So my point is, if you're autistic to a degree where you're still able to do all the things that you need to do to, like, function. I think they call them, oh, what do they call them? I don't know. My brother does, like, mental health for a living, and there's basically this, like, acronym for, if you are, like, functioning in everyday life and you can do these things, like, it's like literally, like, take a shower, cook meals, all that, like, is it really a problem if you can manage these symptoms on your own? And I'd invite you to think about that. So, I don't know. I hope that this is helpful for anybody who's sitting here wondering about this, because I think it's a good question, and I think it's a good thing to think about. And yeah, I share my experience openly because I hope that in some way it will help some other people. But also, I can relate to the fact that if it's the only thing I'm talking about, it can get kind of annoying. So I try not to let my autistic special interest only be autism. It kind of fluctuates. For some time after graduating my master's, it was the U.S. housing market, and then it turned into personal finance, and probably still kind of stuck there right now. And then sometimes it's about relationships. Yeah, like, right now I'm actually pretty interested in, like, sort of this, like, dating crisis, and, like, people not having kids, and there's a lot of content on the internet about people being really upset that they didn't have kids already, and they're, like, running out of time. And then I, like, low-key secretly feel very lucky that I'm not going to have that problem. But Also, this was not exactly the plan, so whatever. But anyway, so my point is, you know, it is what it is. And, you know, I think that like learning to like yourself and live with yourself, like you live with yourself every day. So it's like learning how to manage yourself is probably the most important life skill that you can have. And this is something I'm always working on, but it is a good skill. All right. Well, anyway, I hope this was helpful. And again, thank you for your continued support of my channel. And at some point, I'm going to go back to sleep because I decided to start recording super early in the morning to sort of like compartmentalize and get this out of the way so I can keep obsessively cleaning and cooking before the baby comes. All right. Well, until next time, bye.